Hey there, welcome to another little paint with me tutorial video, and today I'm going to be making these very cute little flower pots that I've painted with a cat and a dog, and I'm going to show you how I did this. It's a little bit of a chill paint with me video and also tutorial along the way. So first of all, let's take a look at the materials that you are going to need to make this project if you want to do it too. So I'm using these little terracotta flower pots. These are just from the dollar store, and they are plain. I didn't coat them with anything. I'll talk a bit more about sealing them later in the video, but I'm just using them straight up. Pulling out a couple different brushes here. I'm going to use an assortment throughout the video just as I do smaller parts or bigger, but these are the ones I definitely use, which is tiny, medium, and a bit of a flat one for the bigger spaces. And yes, some of my brushes have been through quite a lot. One of them here is taped up. So the pots, yeah, they are about 3 or 4, I think they're 4-inch terracotta clay pots. You can use any size you like. I'm also using this big seashell as my palette for my paint today because it's all I could find that would work, but I love painting on a seashell. This is some of the paint I'm using. I'm going to use an assortment of different qualities of paint. I like an expensive white paint. This is just, I mean, it's a $10 bottle. But I'm also using these dollar store acrylic paints. They totally work fine. Some are darker than others. And I'm also going to be using like an artist grade from a fancy art store acrylic. A little bit of everything. But you'll see I have to do a few coats of certain one of them. First, let's just paint the base of this flower pot. I'm going to do this in white, and this is a pretty thick white acrylic that I'm using. Just putting it on my seashell and then I'm going to paint the two pots. Now, I mentioned sealing these pots. If you are going to be using them for anything wet, which I'm not, I'm going to be using it for like pencil holders and things like that. But if you were going to put an actual plant in here or any other kind of damp thing, then you would probably want to put an acrylic sealant on it. And I would recommend doing this both before you paint the base white and then also when you are done with the design. And that's because terracotta is really porous. It's going to absorb a lot of water. That's kind of one of the benefits when you use it with plants, is that the pot itself will stay moist and hold water. But if you are putting paint on, especially a water-based paint, you definitely don't want water seeping through. So I'm going to be sealing this at the end with not an acrylic sealer. I'm going to just use like a Mod Podge as a sealant. But you may want to use something a little stronger, a polyurethane or any kind of acrylic varnish. That's your choice. You could also opt to spray it, but I prefer to use like a brush-on sealant anytime I do anything like that. So we're just going to do a coat of the white. As I mentioned, with some of the colors I'm going to be using in this video, I have to do a couple coats just because they're not the thickest paint. Now this white paint I actually really love. It does everything great and it's very opaque, but I did do 2 coats of this anyways. And I am painting the insides of the pots as well. So that is just another step. You kind of have to leave it to dry, come back, and in fact this video did take me a very long time to make because of how many times I had to stop, walk away, and wait for the pots to dry. However, doing 2 at the same time does help with that. After you have the white layer done, you might want to start drawing on your illustration and your guides. And I'm going to be doing a cute little design with the dog and the cat. So I'm just using a regular pencil here. Mine was in fact not very sharp, so I'd recommend sharpening them. But it is very difficult to draw on a round shape, and I struggled. So I'm just gonna say that my goal with art, and these pots in particular, is never to make something perfect or something that looks like it was manufactured in a factory or that would sell in a store. I'm just making this because it makes me happy. So I'm not worrying too much about if the paint is a little streaky or if the cat is a little wonky. That's okay, especially as these drawing lines are just guides and I am going to be painting over them. You can also erase them if they're showing through your paint too much. Just use the eraser on your pencil. As long as the white base is nice and dry, then there should be no problem and it should just be able to erase right off. For the kitty's little face, I'm going to be doing kind of my signature look, which is this angry cat face. I do in a lot of my cat art. And I'm giving him some stripes because stripes are a lot of fun. And adding in extra details that I will make more defined when I reach that step of the process, but these are just guidelines to help me know where everything is placed. As you can see, the cat reaches all around the pot. so it kind of fills in this middle area. But I do want to add in some other shapes to fill in the top and around the cat. And I like this look where you don't obey the shape of the pot so much, you just draw and wrap around the edges. I'm adding this very simple flower shape, which I think looks cute. This whole pot is going to be very brightly colored and minimalist coloring, so I think I'm just using 3 paints in total. And that's just because that's the look I wanted, more accessories that kind of fit that look for my house. On the second pot, I'm going to be doing the dog, and it's very similar in structure, it's just a different face, and he has the long body as well. I find drawing dogs a lot harder. It's not as easy for me as cats. I think cats just have very geometric heads, whereas dogs have so much diversity in terms of their shape based on their breed that it's a lot harder to make this sort of platonic ideal of a dog. For the shape that I'm adding on here, I'm doing a leaf. This is just to be a little bit different from the other pot, but I think I'll probably end up doing the leaf and the flower in the same color. With both pots drawn with guides and ready to go, it's time to start painting. So I'm going to start first with the orange paint. And this is just a very simple craft paint that I'm using, which is from the dollar store. And I happen to really love this orange one simply because it is so opaque. And with these bottles from the dollar store, they are very hard to predict as to which ones are going to be high quality and which ones are very thin. I'll try one out later in the video. Hopefully I cut most of that out, but I tried one that was a sort of a seafoam green, and it was like water, it was tinted water. But this orange is very bright and one of my favorite paints to use. So I'm going to do the whole cat in this color, and I'm also going to do the background of the dog pot in that same color. And I'm just speeding it up because this took a long time. I'm a very slow painter, and that's okay because I'm painting because I enjoy it, not just because I'm trying to get it done really quickly. The painting that I do for work is mostly digital illustration, and I find I'm a lot faster with that. I just simply don't have the hand dexterity to paint super accurately or super fast with actual paintbrushes, and maybe that's something that improves with time and experience, but I'm just doing it for fun at this point. So I'm going to fill in this cat, and then I'll move on to the other pot. Cat pot is looking good. I'm going to leave that to dry and work on the dog pot. And I did cut a lot of very boring footage here of me working very slowly to fill in the background of this pot. And that's sort of a choice you can make, especially if you're only doing one, whether you want to do the background first or the subjects first, or you could even do a wash of the background color. Just paint the whole pot this orange color, for example, and not worry about cutting out each of the shapes. I'm doing it this way just so that I don't have to repaint the white in the background to make the other inside elements pop. Moving on to the pink layer, I'm going to be using this art store graduate level acrylic, which honestly, as you're going to see, pretty streaky. It took a couple of coats to get it looking okay, and even by the end of this pot, I just found the background looked pretty streaky, so that's okay. Again, this is just a project I'm doing for fun. If this was something I was going to sell, I would probably mix this paint with the white to make like a pastel pink. That would be a lot more opaque because that white paint is so good. But as you can see here as I paint the bottom, like you can really see even the texture of the white through it. So it will take a few coats to make it even. And because I'm doing this technique of doing the background separately from the decorative elements, it is a little bit trickier because you're doing a lot of edge work basically. I am not a paint snob by any stretch of the imagination. I like using dollar store paint as much as I like using stuff from the art store or the craft store. And those are the three tiers in my mind. Dollar store is cheapest, craft store middle tier, and art store top tier. I just think that, the big difference between the paints is that number one, it's going to be the opacity. So how much paint you get in each swipe, how many layers you have to do to make it fully opaque. But the biggest thing is more about how it's going to hold up over time. A high quality paint is going to be more archival quality, and that means that it's going to be less fade resistant or more durable over time. And that doesn't always really matter to me. Especially if I'm going to be sealing a piece like this, it's going to hold up for a very long time, as long as I need it to hold up. So I have nothing against using a cheap paint, and I find that the difference is only what are you actually painting and how dark do you need it to be. As you can see here, the background of the dog pot, that orange, amazing quality. That paint cost me, I think that was $1.50 for that big bottle, and the pink one was more like $7 for that bottle. Here I'm trying out the thin pink, didn't work out. Switching back to the darker pink, which is thicker but not as dark as I'd like it to be. Anyways, I won't complain more about paints, but that's just a little bit of insight into how I choose them. It's really less about what the cost of the paint is and where it's from, and more just about how it performs in the piece I'm using, which is why it's nice to have a nice collection of paints to choose from at home, and I'm not having to buy new ones every time I have a project. The last color that I'm going to be using to paint on this design is the teal color, and I'm going to use this for the flowers and the leaves that decorate the pots. Now you can see here I did try and use like a seafoam green first, and the color just didn't work out, so it's just going to hang out there in my seashell and dry up. But this teal paint is one of those that is just super opaque from the dollar store. Love it, great price, great product. This is obviously not sponsored by the dollar store. I'm in Canada, so it's Dollarama. If you're interested, great place to get cheap paint. Not all of them are great. I do think that these colors together, the orange, the magenta, and the teal, are a really great combination. They are sort of a color triad, which means that they are form a triangle on the color wheel. And I think that it really pops and kind of fits with my design style right now, which is super colorful, maximalist as much as I can. I do actually paint the interior of this pot. I don't leave it white, but the magenta is a little bit frustrating to work with, as you may have noticed. So I'm going to fill it in off camera. But filling in these flowers, everything is going to take a couple of coats. So I filmed this over the course of a really long afternoon, at least this step of the process. And I did have to leave the pots overnight a couple of times, not just because it takes that long to dry, but just that's how life is when you're doing crafts and you have other things to do. Now I have the colors pretty much all done. I will do the interiors later when the outside is dry. The final step before sealing this design is to do the outline. Now, originally I was planning on doing this with a fine liner brush and some paint, but I decided that I was not proving to have super steady hands from the rest of this project, so I switched over to using a Sharpie. Using a Sharpie on a pot or over acrylic paint in particular is not necessarily the easiest thing to do, and that's because the ink in the Sharpie does tend to dry out a little bit fast. So I would recommend buying some specifically for this if you don't mind it. I'm using a blue one for this pot, I use black for the other. As you can see, it does go on really nice, and it also doesn't bleed when I do the coat on the exterior to seal it. So it's a great medium, it's just that this can burn out your Sharpies pretty fast. I think that's partly because of all the texture on the pot, and also because it's, I guess I'm not really sure why else. I think it's mostly just the texture of the pot that aggravates the tip of the marker, and I think that makes it work a little bit less well. So I don't mind destroying my Sharpies for this, but feel free to use a fine lining brush and black paint or another dark color if you like. You can see I'm also not doing a perfect job here just because of the difficulty of working on such a small, round, textured surface, but I really don't mind. I think this turned out very cute, and here is what it looked like when it was all outlined. I'm going to add in a little bit more detail, but it's starting to look kind of sharp. It cleans up a lot of the mistakes that I made in terms of the actual painting, which is nice because I did make a lot of little mistakes. I decided to add in some stars just for interest, and this ended up being my favorite of the two pots, I think partly because of that nice orange background, which clearly I'm partial to, but also I just think the little details turned out very cute. After adding in all the dots, I did add some dashes onto the dog to do like a fur texture because his body was very plain and I thought he needed a little something else. And I think that looked really cute. Also adding in the paw prints because the back paws are sort of facing up. So I added in the pads and the front paws are facing down, so you don't really see the pads as much. But that's how this one turned out. I am really happy with it. I think it's very cute, even if the pink is a little streaky, you know? It doesn't matter that much. I think it still looks cute, especially when you add the marker over top. It kind of distracts from the patchiness a little bit and makes it look a little more finished. Now here's the cat one, which I also did with a Sharpie. I used a black one here, and I'm not going to take you through the process, but that's what it turned out to be. This was a little bit more frustrating. I think it was just came down to my marker was not as good, but we got there in the end, and I'm very happy with it. The final step is sealing these designs. So I'm going to be using Mod Podge to seal them. The one that I'm using here is a satin water-based sealer. It is what I use for all of my paintings, as long as it's not something that's going to get wet, because obviously with this is water-based, it means that when water hits it, it becomes gluey again. So this is just a sealant if you're using it for non-plant or water purposes. In order to make sure that whatever I've used isn't going to run with the paint, or with this sealant, I mean, I'm going to try it on the bottom first, and that's just what I'm doing here. And I noticed pretty quickly that the Sharpie and the paint was not budging as soon as I put the sealant on. But you always want to test, because you don't want to hit a big glob of sealant on the side of your design and discover that it makes everything run and blur. That's a risk if you're using like a regular marker. If you were using Crayola markers or something like that, that wasn't a permanent or archival marker, then that is a possible risk. You might have more success sealing with an aerosol or some kind of spray fixative. That might not make the ink run as much, but I haven't done that, so I can't guarantee it. And I'm just doing all these sides. Now this sealant will leave sort of texture marks from your brush. I don't mind it, I think it's cute and it makes it look even more authentic and handmade, but you can smooth it out further if you like. It will dry down with a bit of texture. And this one is also satin finish, so it's not super shiny, but it definitely is still in the shiny category. I ended up doing these in 2 stages. This one I kind of fumbled a little bit, but I basically did the exterior and then the interior separately and let it dry in between. And I did that just because it's really hard to hold, as you're witnessing there. So now let's look at the final look of the project when it's all dry. I think they turned out exceptionally cute. I'm very happy with them, and I have tried them in a bunch of different contexts, but you can see the shine here, and it's a really nice finish even with the brush strokes. I think it looks textured and nice, and those colors really pop. They are just as vibrant as I was hoping for. And I think this goes to show that the quality or the price of the paint doesn't actually affect its quality as much as you would think it does, because the ones that were cheaper on this design, I think, look a little bit better. But of course, it always depends on what your project is for. Here's a few different ways that I've styled these pots. I tried putting it on a shelf with my art supplies in them, which I really like. I really hope that you enjoyed this project and followed along with me. If you like art videos, craft tutorials, or just little chill art times, then please do consider subscribing. I hope I will see you again very soon.